Oh, well, that looks on live. All right. Bonjour tout le monde. This is John F. McDropout. I'm joined today with Sophia panelists Epicurus A. Greek and Jibran Ludwig. Today we're here to finish off our discussion on David Hume's Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion. I'm going to turn on my camera here real quick so you guys can see me. Hey, how's it going, guys? Good to see you today. This one's been put off for a little while due to some scheduling issues. It looks like we're ready to go now, though.
Yeah, both. Yeah, absolutely. It's yeah. There were several different kinds of scheduling issues actually, but yeah, I'm glad to finally finish this one up. It's a good dialogue.
It was, and I must say, John, that is a fabulous mohawk haircut you have there.
Oh, thanks, buddy. Yeah, I've been trying to get a little more. My girlfriend calls it rockabilly. I don't really know what that means. So I guess that's what the kids are calling it these days.
For taking 1950s rock and roll with a
Oh,
mixed punk attitude.
all right. Well, thanks for that. Thanks for letting me in on that. I'm definitely a little clueless sometimes when it comes to those things. So yeah, I mean, this dialogue, like you're right. I mean, this extra time that I had with it actually gave me a lot more time to read and reread this part 12, and I think it's a really excellent piece to end the whole thing on. I mean, it really does get into a lot of the major arguments against why you'd be against a religious expression, like I believe they call it vulgar superstition, or the ideas of theology that don't necessarily mesh up with this idea of a supreme being, right? So I'm just trying to get us to kind of where we're sitting now at part 12. I think at this point, one of the three people who've been talking, they have left, right? I mean, Demia has left Cleanthes and Philo to talk. So now it's just the philosophical skeptic versus the evidentialist theist, I believe would be the.
I would say philosophically minded theist, the theist that believes that natural religion is the way to go, rather
Mhm.
than revealed or mystical religion, where Demia was more advocating for that kind of really conservative mysticism.
Yeah, definitely.
This is interesting because you kind of get to hear throughout most of the dialogue, Philo is playing the devil's advocate, but during this last section here, he really kind of lays his views to bear, both for the purposes of, well, both to to Cleanthes and to his student, and I can't remember his student's name, unfortunately. What was his name?
Pamphilus, right?
Pamphilus. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And the problem here, the thing that I've struggled with reading this dialogue is it's really hard to figure out what Hume actually believes here. Um, it seems that his point is that a sophisticated theist, one that doesn't have a position that he would have any problem with, is basically identical to an atheist as far as their actual beliefs go. And so it's not clear if I mean, in this dialogue, he's using it kind of as a way to criticize the atheist, but I don't actually know if that's what he believed. He may have done that merely because that would be more agreeable to his audience. I'm curious as to what you all thought.
There's definitely sort of an element I've noticed running through the whole thing where I will find myself agreeing with all three of them on certain points and disagreeing on others. And so I think maybe that kind of added to my confusion as to where I thought maybe David Hume's opinion lied on it. I think it's pretty clear that he is in fact arguing against the idea that we can make declarations about things that we're saying are incomprehensible, and I think he's definitely attacking that idea with Philo the skeptic. But
Yeah.
I don't know if he would classify himself as an atheist per se, or would even, I think there is definitely a bit of a deistic bent to the whole dialogue, right?
Yeah, I guess the question I'm kind of curious about is how much does that reflect what Hume actually believed, and how much is that just kind of him trying to like pander to the audience to some extent?
Yeah, I
Um,
agree. I mean, I kind of was curious about that also. It does seem kind of like maybe he was using that as a tool to get his point across and raise these doubts without putting himself open to the charge of heresy or being seen as a in direct opposition to the church or anything.
I think it's also important to remember. I think that you said this just now that you found yourself agreeing with people other than Philo.
Definitely,
And
yeah. Cleanthes has some
yeah,
great points during this dialogue. So it's hard for me, because I don't agree with him on so many things, but the more I've looked at it, the more I feel like he reflects a lot of what a lot of the objections that I have over religion. He actually has over some of the points too. So
yeah, and I think what you get from that is that it's because we can find ourselves agreeing with the people we disagree with. It's a great demonstration of how good this dialogue is at kind of showing the different viewpoints really fairly, I think, and rigorously. Um, and I have a lot of respect for Hume. I think he did a really great job here.
I'm
What do you
personally,
think, Eddie?
well, I'm personally of the opinion that Hume, that through each of these characters, Hume does actually show a bit of what he believes. I think, like Philo, he is not one to call himself on. If Philo is any indication of what he believes, is not one to call himself uh, knowable on the existence of God, because God, as Hume would have saw it, is a metaphysical notion, and and we all know how David Hume felt about metaphysical notions. There's something you can't really grasp onto. I think for my dollar, Hume basically thought of God in the same way he thought of causation. He thought, yeah, it could never be demonstrated in any way, shape, or form, but it's something you just have to assume. So when you walk out the house, uh, you have to rest assured gravity isn't just gonna whoosh and take you and stop working and whoosh you go right into the sky. So I think for
Hmm.
Hume and via Philo, God remains more along the lines of a better possibility as opposed to something concrete you could definitely say exists. I think Hume is more along the lines of challenging our knowledge as opposed to challenging our knowledge of the answers.
Yeah, I guess I think he directly contradicts that to some extent. I agree that he's challenging our knowledge, but he also um, he, the point he makes is that these things are either unknowable. If I mean, even if they're say it is true that God exists, the kind of God that he thinks can be argued for successfully is the kind of God that would have no effect on one's life whatsoever. And so deism may be a good way of describing it, but I don't think that he thinks that you have to assume that. Um,
Fair point.
that's I think the difference between the causation and induction and God as far as he might see it. But yeah, it's really unclear to me what he actually believed.
Hmm.
yeah, I think an amalgamation of all the characters is probably closer to what is accurately describing what he might believe, but it would be really tough to kind of parse it out, right?
Yeah.
I think even in this dialogue he kind of mentions, like when you don't have a clear separation between all these things, it can be tough to determine where one thing starts and one thing ends, right? Where it's he's got a few different viewpoints that he's bringing out, and it's hard to say which one he agrees with more because he does such a great job of defending them all, right?
Yeah, I think it's an excellent dialogue for people that agree with Hume or disagree with him or have no idea what he believes about religion. It's just a wonderful it's a wonderful dialogue. I would strongly recommend it to atheists, theists, deists, apatheists. It'll probably really appeal to apatheists actually. But um, to maybe get back to get to the text a little bit. Do you all maybe John? You seem to probably be the most familiar with the text. We've all read it, but you've probably studied it more than we have. Would you care to give maybe like a description of the section?
Sure. I mean, well, this one is a lot about it's directly between Cleanthes and Philo. So I mean, these guys are kind of going directly head to head as far as their arguments go. And it's Philo brings up a ton of great arguments against religion in here. The first one he goes into is the idea of efficiency in nature, and I think he gets into the idea of we're not arguing about the fact that nature has order, but that that order infers a designer, right? That we need this designer to infer the cause, right? And it's a really great as far as that goes. I mean, but I think what he really gets into it is the idea when he starts to talk about the idea of hypocrisy in religion and how religion can actually have negative effects that that Cleanthes and Demea seem to be not maybe just not acknowledging, right? And that from all through this discussion, the idea of religion is kind of talked about in positive terms, and they kind of give religion the benefit of the doubt as far as its positive effects. But at this point, that Philo starts to point out that religion is really it has some effects that seem to go counter to its stated goals, and I think that's a really really important point that they.
There's a really important distinction that he makes between true religion and popular religion, and when he talks about true religion, he's talking about the philosophical religion of Cleanthes, and when he's talking about popular religion, well, he's talking about popular religion as it's experienced by the vast majority of people. He makes what I think is the very good point that the sorts of people who are philosophically inclined enough to study true religion, as he calls it, don't need religion to be good. They're going to be people who are inquisitive and care about doing the right thing. Otherwise, why would they bother studying these sorts of things? So he makes the point that while true religion would, if someone truly believed in it, would make them more moral, but the people that believe in it are already moral, and popular religion doesn't help people be more moral. It can even corrupt them. As he says, the zealot can easily be drawn to do things that might be immoral purely in the name of that religion. He's making the point that one's natural tendency towards good is much more valuable than this sort of religious tendency.
Although within the dialogue, the Catholic priest and philosopher and Cartesian Malebranche is actually given as a counterexample of this as somebody who does subscribe to a popular notion of religion, yet at the same time embraces a philosophical endeavor to understand God through a natural religion. So I think really considering that, he does perhaps give one example to the contrary in hopes of showing that it doesn't need to be all corruptive.
No, but that's not what I said, though, and I don't think Hume said it was all corruptive. He just said it had the possibility of corrupting, that it doesn't really help people for the most part. It mostly corrupts them. It does more harm than good is more what he's arguing. I don't think he's arguing that it doesn't help anybody, and he'd probably say that this priest was practicing true religion as well. I'm not saying I agree with him necessarily. I'm just trying to describe, I think, what he said.
Fair enough.
But sure. I don't think he said it was all corrupting. Just that zealotry can easily lead to immorality.
Yeah, I think he's making a more general statement, and he kind of splits it up a little bit, right, into the idea of that the religion that we have now is almost necessarily corrupted. I think he says that it's, where does he say it here, that that nature has adjusted the circumstances of our existence, and that it's clear that we are here now, and that we can't doubt that because of the argument that there must be an initial cause to our existence, that we can't doubt of a designer, and so the designer must be we must attribute the designer some sort of perfection, and in that way, once we do that, the religion that we create around it seems to be necessarily fall short of the standards that we set with that creator, right? We attribute him a lot of power and perfection, and yet we end up creating a religion that doesn't seem to reflect the perfect desire that he should have, or the standards that he should hold as the person, as a supreme being or creator.
I think my favorite set of lines here, I've got to find it, but he's talking about how men can argue all day about whether or not. Oh, okay, hold on. Here we go. Men may argue to all eternity whether Hannibal be great, or a very great, or a superlatively great man, what degree of beauty Cleopatra possessed, what epithet of praise Livy or Thucydides is entitled to, without bringing the controversy to any determination.
Sure, yeah.
That's my favorite line of this.
There's a great little section there, and he's talking about how this tends to turn into a dispute about words, right? And it's weird because where's this section here? he's talking about these controversies concerning the degrees that don't have quality, or they're referring to degrees of quality or circumstance, right? And not quantitative. You can't. I think he says something like, because the degrees of these qualities are not like in quantity or number susceptible to exact mensuration, which may be the standard in the controversy, the disputants may agree in the sense and then differ in terms, or vice versa. And it's weird that he gets right to the root of that issue. That I think he says that the theist will allow that their difference between the God and themselves is almost so large that they can't even comprehend it, right? The difference itself is almost incomprehensible, and so how could they comprehend the deity? And then you look at the other way, and the atheist seems to assert that the deity must necessarily have some sort of analogy to us, right? And that there must be some sort of similarity. And he says, that if you're both affirming that the deity must that the deity must have, if you're both arguing for the same thing, but you can switch your positions like that without losing too much of the meaning of what you're talking about, are you just disputing about the words of the argument and not the actual objects of the argument, right? You're just switching terms, I think, is how he's kind of putting it. Eddie, what do you think about that?
You mean my personal favorite part, or in terms of what you were just saying?
Yeah, I mean, do you think I'm kind of accurately describing what he's trying to get at there? I mean, he does kind of state the atheist or the theist and the atheist as affirming that there probably is a creator, but that we're just disputing over whether or not it looks like us or doesn't, or how much it looks like us. I'm just using the word looks in colloquial sense.
I think that would pretty much amount to our notion of the God of the gaps, wherein God is just merely posited as an explanandum of something that needs to be explained. For example, if one were to argue where did the universe come from, or what created the universe, then you would say then that would automatically point to pretty much anything. But if you say who created the universe, you kind of assume an explanation, because you assume that thing must be personal in some way, shape, or form. Whereas specifically with what science, with what the what question does is it leaves something far more open to be more than just personal, if anything at all. Whereas the who kind of shoehorns it. So I would say that would be the biggest distinction Hume makes. It's the difference between somebody who posits God as merely an answer to the I don't know, as opposed to placing God as opposed to placing what God is as a necessity within the realm of creation that needs to be there.
Yeah, I think that's right. But at the same time, I mean, we're talking about something that is sort of outside of our observable reality, right? In a way, right? I mean, we're sort of stating that all of the observable reality is contained within the God in some senses, and then the atheist, is stating more that there's a separation between the God and the observable reality. And I think that there's like almost a more general sense that he's almost getting at there too.
In the sense that the theist believes that God is somehow a part of the universe, in the same way that my mind is a part of my brain is a part of my body, in that kind of sense.
Yeah, I think so. There's how does he put it? I think during some of the earlier sections, he talks about the when we're talking about a mind, there's a required succession of state changes when we're talking about minds, that minds require a change in state, and that God doesn't have that required change in state because he remains constant due to his attributes, right? He doesn't seem to change his mind. He can't really change his mind about things if he's already knows everything, right? It's sort of...
Well, that would mean, that would only be true so far as you would buy into the explanation that God is timeless. Not all theists would agree with that. In fact, there are some theists such as Paul Hasker, who would maintain that God actually does exist within time, as well as Richard Swinburne and Anthony Kenny. Well, Anthony Kenny's more of an agnostic, but he thinks that if God were to exist, he would exist within time. Swinburne would agree that God exists within time constantly, just like a hyper time that's beyond the one connected in our own dimension. But I'll excuse that viewpoint, as that's not a viewpoint I personally hold on to, and thus I don't think I'd be willing to defend. What I think is more apt to say about God is not really a mind but an intellect. And to just get to the difference between these two notions, imagine could you possibly for a minute imagine a figure with 1,000 sides?
Yeah, that would be tough for me. That's for sure.
The imagination, exactly. That's something the imagination can't comprehend. It's really no different than something with only 997 sides, or you couldn't distinguish it from something with 1,003 sides. But your intellect grasps that particular essence, what it means to be such a thing. And in the same way, God is an intellect, not because in his timelessness he holds on to all essence here throughout his existence, and the universal essence stays the same, stagnant, unmoved, while everything around it, the particulars, are in movement, and they move around him in the similar way that if you would imagine the sun is stationary and the planets revolve around it in that kind of pull. Of course, this is just to be more along the lines of an analogy as opposed to just perfectly fitting. But we all know what you think, how uncomfortable you'd feel with the analogies at this moment. So I'll field the response to you.
Right. I mean, Hume is he's really critical of this, right? He's talking about the I think when you first get into the analogy, he's talking about well, I'll just quote him here. That the works of nature bear a great analogy to the productions of art is evident, and according to all the rules of good reasoning, we ought to infer, if we argue at all concerning them, that their causes have a proportional analogy. But as there are also considerable differences, we have reason to suppose proportional differences in the causes. And I think that's kind of where it goes, right? I mean, we wonder about how much the differences actually indicate a difference in the causes, and that sort of we have to have a real good sense of what the quantitative differences are in the causes, right? That without that, it's sort of difficult to pin down how good the analogy would actually be.
Quantitative or qualitative?
Quantitative. You need an exact mensuration, I believe he keeps saying. So I think, yeah, I mean, he says, there's a species of controversy from the very nature of language and human ideas that is involved in perpetual ambiguity, right? He talks, mere controversies concerning degree of quality and circumstance, and I think that's where he kind of argues against the purely analogous deity, right? I think it's not clear exactly that the design of it necessarily has an analogy that's so direct, right?
So to not belabor the point about minds too much, the broader point that he's making is that to use an analogy to describe a being, it's only meaningful if, for example, it's only meaningful to say that God is wise if it would be less correct to say that God is unwise. Then it has some meaning, but only then. But if it's equally correct, for example, it's equally correct to call a rock wise or unwise. Neither one is particularly meaningful. They don't mean anything in relation to a rock. And if it's neither correct to call, if it's not incorrect to call God unwise, then it's not correct to call him wise in analogy. That's really the broader point that he's making. If the analogy doesn't have to hold perfectly, but if it doesn't hold, if it has to hold to some extent at least, and if it doesn't hold at all, then it's pointless to use it. And that's, I think, the broader point that he was making there, but I could be incorrect.
Well, that sounds right. Yeah.
Well, first of all, I would say espouse that Hume really doesn't grasp the difference between an analogy and what something might be known as metaphorical. So, for example, if I were to say, for example, um, the the morning breeze does not move the way she moves. First of all, that would be kind of a metaphor. That would be a metaphor in its sense. You're saying that the breeze itself isn't capturing something that this particular thing has. So in that kind of sense, you're using it as a metaphor to exacerbate a certain quality. Whereas
Like by exacerbate, do you mean like emphasize or like highlight a
Point
certain
out,
quality?
yeah.
point out, that these words will do just fine.
Go.
So that's a specific metaphor to capture something. But when you use an analogy, that means right now you don't have anything at your disposal as a way to reflect something else. For example, let's just say if we blindfolded ourselves and tied our hands back, and we could only smell a certain object until we can try to figure out what it is. Granted, we're kind of limited because we only have one sense, that is the sense of smell. But we'll say it smells like if we say it smells like a fish head, or if it smells like garbage, we'll know that these words are analogous. We don't have any surefire way aside from our sense to essentially just get an idea from what's going on. So if I'm constantly if we constantly try our best, we might never come up with the precise answer of what many other qualities of that thing are, but we will come to a much farther sense. In that same way, we are incapacitated in a lot of because we think a lot imaginatively. We are incapacitated from thinking in a full intellectual sense, or at least to an intellectual rigor that the Almighty Himself thinks. So we obviously have to do our best to work within human intellect. And in the same way, an analogy represents a limit within the human capacity to understand the divine, and it works as a helpful tool or as a helpful fix.
Okay,
It does not.
I mean, what you said, most of that may very well be accurate, but it's missing the overall point. The point is not that I or Hume or anyone else is claiming that we should be able to describe God perfectly. That's not what we're claiming. All we're saying is that if the analogy, to use a word, any word to describe God, let's ignore the word analogy in this case. Let's just say to use a word to describe God. Even not literally, to say God is intelligent might not be literally true, but let's assume we're using the word intelligent to describe God.
Mm-hmm.
That's only an appropriate description of God if it would be less appropriate to describe God as the opposite of that. So if it would be incorrect to describe God as unintelligent, or less accurate to describe God as unintelligent than intelligent, then it is more accurate to describe him as intelligent. But the problem is that when we're talking about something that doesn't have a mind in a way that we can even begin to describe, it ceases to have any value to describe God as intelligent, or even knowing. I would argue to say that God knows something. It's a bit odd for a couple of reasons, but we probably don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole. But I think the broader point, it's that it may help you feel that you understand something, but only through anthropomorphizing it, only by disanalogy, by false analogy. That's the argument, I think, is that sure, it makes people say, well, okay, God is this wise and good person, and we can imagine a wise and good person, and so to us those words have a meaning that we can ascribe to God, and that allows us to understand God. But the question really is that understanding of God any more accurate than an understanding of God that is foolish and harmful to people. Which one is more appropriate? And if one is more appropriate, why is it more appropriate? That's really the question.
I see. One is just more appropriate in terms of how humans are supposed to relate to that figure. For example, if that figure is the prime mover, that is that which is unmoved, that which is stable, and everything moving around it, then that means in relation to God, we are far weak because less things move around us. Granted, for example, I have the potential to move books, to write plays, not write plays. I'd like to write songs, poetry, so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
I have the power to move other things, but certainly not to the extent that everything revolves around God or around God Himself, simply for the fact that God doesn't need to move Himself because everything just will move around. That is kind of the analogy in terms of the relativity towards human. Now, is it true that God is intelligent? Of course, it's far more true that God is intelligent, or more apt to be described with intelligence than unintelligence, because within God is the eternal form in which other things take their shape or their form themselves, or to use an Aristotelian term that I know Jibran doesn't like, a formal cause. They take their forms and shapes in terms of being influenced to move in that direction, and to conform that intellect in that universal.
All right. Well, I mean, I've challenged on this before. I don't think there's any point in us arguing about this anymore. But I would like to say though that if all you're saying is that is how people are more apt to describe God, then certainly I'll agree with that. But that doesn't mean it's more appropriate to describe God that way, other than for the sake of conforming to social norms. If I mean,
it's not to social norms. It's to metaphysical relativity.
What you said though is that is what people are more apt to describe God as. How people are more apt to relate to God. That's how
rocks are. No, take any other being in the universe who that isn't God, and I'll say the same thing about that.
Okay. Well, in which case, I think we've exhausted this topic as far as value. I have nothing more intelligent to say on it.
I mean,
just to throw some,
right. Sure, go ahead.
Just to throw something in there, if I did not answer something to your standard of rigor, then I apologize, and I'll see if there's more research I can do on this.
No, I mean it's not that. It's just I don't think there's a point in us talking about this anymore. I think we have an axiomatic difference, and it doesn't matter how much we discuss it. And it wouldn't be a lacking of rigor in one person if it was a true axiomatic difference. That's all I'm saying, is that I think arguing about this point is totally fruitless because we have fundamentally different ways of seeing so many things that it's just there's no point in arguing about this particular topic, this very particular part of it at least.
Well, especially since this is such a major theme in this dialogue, right? I mean, the idea of analogy, they kind of come at it with from a bunch of different ways, right? And I think there's, I think what we're talking about here is, I think they mentioned, what do they say? If the analogy isn't available to further extension or or provide us with any sort of predictive capability, then the analogy sort of falls into the ideas of just purely conjecture, right? I mean, there becomes no practical use for the analogy if we can't use that analogy to come up with a truth about the thing that we're talking about. Do you see what I'm saying? So in that way, we use the analogies. When we say we're using analogies, it has to have some sort of use as a model for what we're talking about, right? I think I can't really come up with a specific example of that, but I think that's a fairly, it's almost definitional in analogy, right? That there has to be some sort of further extension that you can take with it, because if not, I think you're just comparing it. If there is no extension that can be done, then all you're doing is making a comparison, and that's just a simile, right? That's just you're basically just saying this is like this, and I think with analogy there has to be the ability to move forward, and I think that's what makes it a little different from metaphor sometimes. I think metaphor is like it's a reference, right? It's giving us a referent point. So that would be what I think the distinctions maybe between those are. But it's I think Jibran's right that there's sort of how much value we put in the similarities versus the differences, and how well we think that analogy can be extended will determine how well we think that analogy fits. I hope I'm not piling on you
Oh,
there.
no, remember, this is from a lot of lack of sleep, so you're going to have to
Yeah, very
excuse me.
little sleep. Hey, no trouble, man. I'm on the same boat. Yeah, I'm surprised you guys. On a separate note, I'm surprised you guys went so late last night. I was already dead tired when I hung up. So
Sophia
cool.
X Nihilo, we are willing to stay up and discuss this stuff with you.
That's right. Today I was looking around for a third end to burn my candle on. Doesn't look like I have one though. Cool. So yeah. So just to finish up analogy then. I mean, Clancy's he's very insistent that there is an analogy that can be made. And I don't think that Philo really disagrees with him, because he says that the works of nature have a much greater analogy to the effects of art and contrivance than those of our benevolence and justice. And so we have reason to infer that the natural attributes of the deity have a greater resemblance to those of men than to his moral or than his moral have to human virtues. And I think that's an important point. That there's clear differences that we could, if we're taking this as an analogy, then we have to acknowledge that there's some large differences that need to be accounted for in that analogy, right? And I think sometimes it's a problem of imperfect analogy, and sometimes it's a problem of the analogy being inadequate, right?
I think one has to understand the use of analogy as a way of relating to the doctrine of divine simplicity, and that is where the analogy shines in terms of where it does take us forward in understanding what God's indivisibility, metaphysical indivisibility, maintains. So, for example, if I were to say God is, let's say, if I were to say, for example, God is all-powerful, that means God is pure act. That there is nothing in which God could ever want or strive for or desire. There is nothing private from him. Everything that makes God, everything that God is will be. It's never changing. What will change? But anything with potential, anything that isn't pure act, is always moving, or is always moving, and is always being acted upon something that is action. So in that way, that's where I see the analogy of power coming from, and it does take us that far into seeing that there is no division in potential and actual in God. And there is also no division in essence and existence within God. So the way God is how he exists, and the way God exists is the way how he is. Now, what does that mean? That means whenever you describe something as an essence, that means what it is to be that specific thing. That is to say, God is perfect by his own standard, his own unchanging standard, and God fully conforms to that in his role within the universe. So in the same way, when I say what does it mean to be good, it's when humanity conforms to its essence of what it means to be human. It means to be a fulfilled human being, even though no one fits that whole essentialness of humanity. We are all theologically strive towards that in our moral endeavors. So this is why I would say God is all good, because he has no division in terms of his essence and existence. The way he exists is the way he is, and the way he is how he exists. And lastly, with knowledge, God is, in terms on all intellect, he is the form that all subsequent forms take. He is the universal. He is not a particular of something, but rather what it means to be God is what he is, and that's not something unshared by anything else. So with that, I would also call him all-knowing, because all knowledge, that is, all universal understanding of everything else, comes from God. So yeah, I do think these analogies do have do describe something, that is God's indivisibility. That's what the analogies lead towards.
All right, but you did just say right now that correct me if I'm wrong. You said that God is all-knowing because all understanding ultimately comes from God, or in this case, from understanding the form that God embodies, or however you wish to describe that. Is that inaccurate?
Um,
Did you mean something else, or is that what you meant to communicate? Did,
let's see if I can.
did we describe God as knowing, or not that we describe it as knowing, but God is knowing because we can gain understanding through God.
Okay.
Is that
First of all, let me just thought what I'm getting at here in terms of. Excuse me. Let me just thought what I'm getting here, right before we get into any deeper. Just for those of you who don't know how a form exists, the Platonic notion had the forms existing in their own dimension, whereas in the Aristotelian notion, forms existed within particular things. Aristotle just brought them down and had the substance exist within that thing. So, ball's sphericality exists within that ball. Now, and Aristotle also hold that they exist within human intellect. So, for example, in the same way that our intellect is able to grasp hundred-sided shapes or thousand-sided shapes, they're also able to grasp these concepts without visualizing them or imagining them. So in that same way, the scholastic position is in an intermediacy where the Platonic forms are the eternal intellect of God. So anything that takes upon a knowledge of itself in terms of its identity, any particular thing, is rooted in the being of God existing eternally. That is how I would phrase it.
Okay. Well, I think I mean I don't have any problems necessarily with that analogy. I don't think it has the extension that I would prefer analogy to have. But I think and I think sometimes it pushes the definition of analogy a little far, right? When you're just describing a property of a god, it becomes harder to see where the analogy starts and stops. I mean, am I kind of being clear there? You're describing an attribute of God instead of an analogy itself. So we're, I mean, because I think when we're talking about analogy, we're trying to compare it to something that it's not. There's almost there's this relativity that's sort of necessary with it, and I think it's sort of based on our experience as far as Hume is concerned.
Yeah, but I think I answered fair enough. But I think I answered at least I tried to answer the main objection about how knowledge, goodness,
Right.
all this pertains more to God than to even humans and any other thing in the universe.
Yeah.
Much better than non-goodness, non.
All right. Well, I mean, I can continue to press that point though, because here's the thing. So you're saying that God is all-knowing because God is necessary for knowledge. God is the embodiment of all forms. Is that really what you're saying? Again, I rather than explaining it all again, just correct me where I'm wrong, please. That is
okay.
I'm more effective.
Okay, where I think you're getting things wrong is you're confusing. Let's see. I think the problem might be is that you're confusing. We're making a bit of a confusion between knowledge of what things are with knowledge of how things become. So, for example, knowledge of how things become. These are evident. These are evident in first and foremost in their teleology, where they end up, what their goal-orientedness is.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I'd reject there's a distinction at all. That would be my objection.
All right, but can I? All right,
feel free. Go on. You can feel free.
All right. So of course, Jibran would probably reject that, but let's
if Aristotle said it, I'll probably reject it. So.
I see. Aristotelian snobbery.
Yeah, really.
I've yet to come across anything he said that I agree with.
I think we're.
Wittgenstein, I am so gonna be critical on you.
I don't agree with Wittgenstein on almost anything. So that's no problem for me.
All right,
Well, that's good.
Uh,
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think we should leave the analogy alone. I mean, I know it's going to come up here again in the dialogue, but I think we can move on to a little bit of a different topic here, which comes up right afterwards. And it's when Cleanthes sort of, he's Philo basically brings up that the supreme being is supposed to be perfect, right? Absolutely and entirely perfect, and that the religion that we should be seeing stem from the natural attributes of this deity should, in fact, reflect that sort of perfection, or or at least that attempt towards perfection. And I think Cleanthes sort of picks up on what he's saying, and he says, religion, however corrupted, is still better than no religion at all. The doctrine of a future state is so strong and necessary a security to morals that we ought never to abandon or neglect it. For if finite and temporary rewards and punishment have so great an effect as we daily find, how much greater must be expected from such as are infinite and eternal. And I think that's on the surface that's a really great argument actually for natural, or for theism in general. That
or for at least leaving religion alone.
Right, and exactly, and I heard this a lot growing up in Christianity circles, right? That even though we saw daily things happening, horrible things happening within church communities, we assume that it was the corruption of the people inside the communities, right? And I would often hear, better this than no Christianity at all, right? That just because some people are corrupted, that it doesn't mean that the basis of this religion or the basis of this theology is any way flawed or misled, right? And I think that's pretty compelling, especially when you're within the religion itself.
I think that Philo's response, though, is pretty good. To be honest.
Really, he does. Yeah, I was going to get into that.
No, I do think it is a good argument on the surface, but
definitely. Yeah, I was curious, Eddie. I mean, have you ever heard that in your circles too? That better than nothing. I know. Oftentimes when I have just general atheism versus theism, discussions with friends and family and stuff, that sort of thing does come up, where someone will say, I don't have necessarily anything against religion, but I think that some religion is better than no religion, or that some religious influence is better than no religious influence at all. And I think Philo does a great job of knocking it down here, but I was curious if you've noticed that within your circles also.
Well, so remember, I myself was an atheist for a couple of years, and in that time I had my own mother say, "Edward, you are such a good boy, but you don't believe in God. How can this be possible?" She said this to me. At this time, I was like, "Oh, Mom, come on, you can't be serious about it." In any case, I would say that any God who made let's just suppose for the sake of argument that there is a God who does instill morality into human beings. With that being said, it's going to always consist from any creature, even if you disbelieve in God, will at least capture the notion of morality, no matter what position, because that's something you'd want to be ingrained in your creation. In any case, so that's something I've never really gotten about that kind of argument. It really, if somebody who isn't religious can't be moral, then that's just so much the worse for the creator. Not necessarily, or it shows the incompetency of that creator. It doesn't necessarily show that that an atheist leads to being an atheist leads to immorality. And second of all, what I'd also like to stress is it shouldn't even be bad religion versus no religion at all, because there are some religions that are just inadequate to lead a society. For example, give me a John F. McDropout as my prime minister over somebody who's a Christian Reconstructionist any day. That being said,
or Dominionist.
Or Dominionist.
Well, I'm glad I'm ranking a little higher than those guys.
Yeah. You mean
next I'll tell you that he'd rather have you than Stalin as his prime minister.
Yeah. Rather meet me than get AIDS. All right.
We're just giving you shit.
But the other, but all right.
Cool.
But
No,
the
that's fine.
Oh God, I'm sorry.
Yeah, please. Sorry.
Just a digression.
but the underlying point still remains that that just that all religions aren't equal. Not all people are equal when it comes to the notion of approaching morality. A good creator is someone who can create a morality that is accessible to even those in disbelief, even though those in disbelief might not follow it, and even those in belief might not follow it. So I've always just, even as a theist or atheist, just see this point of view as unwarranted.
Yeah, and
But I do believe that it is that certain religions that follow general rules and guidelines and breed community values do have a great influence. And just to give out a shout out to a community that I have always respected, because every one of their members that I've interacted with has always been so kind and gracious to me, the Mormons. So, I, despite what you think about their religion, they are certainly great people, and I think their religion is helpful in bringing that kind of community value.
Yeah, no, I think that you're right and I think Hume agrees with you that surely not all religions are going to be equal. He describes certain versions of Christianity that or certain heresies that decry all morality. And so obviously those are immoral. But yeah, so I think he absolutely agree with you there. And also, he probably and he'd certainly agree that it's more about the person than the religion. I think that's kind of the major point of this chapter, and I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, I think
unfortunately lost.
I think it would be important to emphasize that I don't think that Hume's point in pointing out, I think he says like pernicious consequences on public affairs of vulgar superstition that's associated with religion, and I think he's very specifically pointing to the
popular religion.
Yeah, sort of the dogma that seems to be accompanying a lot of the major religions at the time. He doesn't seem to be saying that religion itself or that even theology itself could be a negative thing. And I think he's actually, even in some cases, he's actually advocating for a better sort of theology, or a theology more accepting of skepticism in its dogmas, right?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree, but he does basically say that we really cannot compare true religion. We cannot talk about religion as if it were only true religion. That's what he says, and by true again, he means philosophical in this context, like what Cleanthes believes. He basically says that I could be incorrect here, but I think he basically says that you can't really talk about religion as if it were only philosophical religion. You have to pay attention to popular religion, even if it is vulgar and leads to immorality, because it is what is in the popular understanding called religion.
Yeah, definitely. And I think Cleanthes brings up the idea of the infinite and eternal rewards and consequences, and the fact that those are supposed to have a greater effect on the vulgar and the uninitiated, basically, right? That those are the force of those consequences are supposed to have a greater effect on the people involved in the religion, and I think that. I think Philo is right in showing that that's clearly not the case. That that things that are far away from us tend to have less importance than the things that are happening to us right now, and that I just think about how long we procrastinated on this dialogue, right? I mean, it seems just procrastination alone is a really great example of that we tend to think that things that are far away have less effect on us, and we do kind of judge our actions accordingly to that. And I think the immediacy is really where a lot of us are convinced in our beliefs, in the immediate actions and responses that we're getting to our sense perceptions and stuff.
Yeah, and I think he says that he says specifically that it's not just the distance, but also the uncertainty of it. Well, even if this person does believe in hell, they can excuse their bad actions by saying, yeah, well, maybe hell doesn't exist. Um, I think that might also be part of it. I mean, it's not only distant, but uncertain to those people, and
Yeah, I think
also, yeah,
yeah, he's
somewhat
definitely talking
ambiguous.
about something that's remote and like not available to our immediate measuring, right? That we can't point to the consequence of this thing. And I think that's really what he's getting to. Not necessarily that it's in the future itself, but that it's uncertain. You know, that it hasn't been proven to be happening in the future.
Yeah, and that makes it hard for people to respond to it. I think that's a really excellent point. That it just these kinds of things. It's like how I mean you can see this in a much more in a different example. The death penalty has been demonstrated to not work as a deterrent at all because people just don't believe they're going to get caught. And even if they do think they're going to get caught, it's just so far in the future that they don't. It doesn't register as being real to them. And that's an example where everyone agrees that the death penalty exists in some states still, depressingly enough. But people don't care even if it does exist. I mean, that's one of the many reasons why one might want to phase it out. Um,
I think there is, and part of that problem is the uncertainty of getting
yeah,
caught, right? That there's no certainty that you're going to be caught, and unless you knew for a fact that you were going to be caught, then the death penalty would, in fact, have the effect that you were hoping it would, right?
It's a little.
yeah, I
It's
don't
a
Not,
little.
know.
and that's not necessarily the case either. I mean, you have
Yeah,
to take into account the person's
just to
wants
use
and
an
desires also.
just to use an example that might illustrate the point. With regards to the death penalty not being a deterrent, while that is true, what has been shown to be a deterrent is actually the fact that a neighborhood where gun ownership is put out there, where you can own a gun, there have been burglars on the record who have said that they would always prefer to rob a house where they know isn't armed as opposed to one where there is, because in that situation, death is far more immediate. Now, there's this whole gun control gun rights issue that is being debated, and I don't want to go on one side here because that's not tangential to this discussion. But what I am saying is, when death is so far close, you are going to have that register, and when hell is just so far off as a metaphysical concept, that that doesn't lead people to see things in their immediacy. Usually, when people I've never met one person who's ever heard the hellfire gospel and converted to the religion, but what they do see is probably their own selves in a kind of hell, maybe drug abuse, maybe some kind of shortcoming, and they're like, you know what, I need to clean myself up because they see a part of that in their lives. It's not because of a whole scare you with the hellfire thing that comes by anyone, and even children if they have who we think are the most susceptible. If you honestly are hitting your kid, then people have actually stated that that kid is more likely to lie in defending himself because, well, he's going to get spanked anyway. So what's one more thing placed on the table?
Hmm.
So yeah, immediacy does make a huge bit of difference, and even to children when again, I remember hearing hell as a kid myself, and while it was something that I didn't like to think about, it didn't stop me from being mischievous uh, or anything of the like. The immediacy is basically what is far more factorial in determining action.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think it can go both ways too, right? I mean, I think sometimes things that are uncertain or predicted for the future can be more scary sometimes. And I think it could keep you from doing something. But I don't know if it could keep you forever, right? And I think he does kind of bring it up. I mean, Philo does bring it up here that it's not about the idea. I think he kind of compares it to gravity, right? That our wants and our desires are with us all the time, and that's a constant draw on us, and that the ideas of the dogmatic ideas of religion and things like that, they kind of hit us in starts and stops, right? And so they don't have this sense of constancy that I think is he's almost getting at too, right?
Well, yeah, it's in sociology, this process, and well, at least Marxist takes of sociology and religious studies, this kind of notion is called hegemony. Hegemony is essentially when a social institution or the hierarchs of a social institution negotiate with the people that are subject under such an institution. For example, within Christianity, over time with pro-choice and homosexual and pro-gay marriage movements, and the fact that more homosexuals are coming out, there's a whole lot more people in the mainstream who are willing to argue and change and have that back and forth kind of dialogue, where things are discussed and put in order. But at the same time, you have you have denominations that are more prone to be anti-hegemonic, where they stay more or less static. And of course, who does the free market reward is another question that comes with regards to all this as well.
So, shit. Someone said something way back. I'm really tired as well. Oh, okay. I was going to agree with you, but I now can't remember what I was agreeing with. As to rewards,
with me.
well, I agree with you sometimes. If I'm not objecting, chances are I either agree or I don't think it's an appropriate time to object.
Sure.
And you know how I find most times appropriate to object. So,
Yeah,
so,
Cool. Well,
oh, hold on.
Well,
So
and
the
you're
point
very
I was going to agree with is that yeah, absolutely, the rewards that are farther off and uncertain affect people less. Oh, you're talking, I think, John, about how things that are uncertain can be scary. The people that think like that, though, are people who are going to have, and I don't use this word to describe, like, I'm not using the word paranoia in like a medical way, but I'm just saying people who are more paranoid, people that are more worried about the possible rather than what they're certain of. Those sorts of people are unlikely to commit crimes anyway, because, well, for the most part, they're unlikely to commit crimes unless they're like violently paranoid, because they'd be really worried about getting caught. So I think that those sorts of people would tend towards being more moral anyway, and hell would be probably less of a deterrent than just your neighbor catching you and you getting executed or whatever. That I think that kind of person I don't think is helped either though.
yeah, I think there is that. In paranoia, there is definitely almost a sense of immediacy that kind of accompanies it. Yeah, I think in most cases, anyways. I suppose it could be extended to the future, but there is this definite. It's definitely an emotion that's sort of driven by adrenaline and not necessarily by higher cognitive processes, right?
Yeah, I don't know about that. I'm not sure that's true, but I would agree with you absolutely that to someone who's more paranoid, the uncertain punishment can be just as, if not more, terrifying than the certain one. But I don't know if religious the threat of religious punishment, if that's more of a deterrent to a paranoid person than the threat of legal punishment. Or of vigilante retribution, like that kind of thing, I would imagine would scare a paranoid person more, or at least as much as the idea of religious retribution. Oh
Yeah.
boy, I am really
Definitely.
falling asleep here.
Yeah, no trouble. So let's try to move into I think we kind of hit that pretty well. Philo really does a great job of kind of pulling this apart. There's a few really great lines in here actually, just in this little section. I was hoping to get to. There's one that's I'll just read it out here. It is certain from experience that the smallest grain of natural honesty and benevolence has more of an effect on men's conduct than the most pompous views suggested by theological theories and systems. I really like that line actually. That that just a smidgen of honesty that really does mean a lot, at least to me, anyways. And it can mean a lot more to me than a lot of knowledge that a person can possibly give me. And I think that's really that's a really great point. And I think he's kind of going into the idea of that none but fools trust a person who says that they've are that they've learned a lot about religion or theology, right? It seems like you're more likely to not trust somebody if they tell you that they're they're talking to you for religious reasons than if they were to tell you that they had some doubts about religious theology, right? And I think that's kind of almost telling, that it's almost natural to have some doubts about religious dogma, right? That sort of speculation almost seems natural to the whole process, and I think it's probably because there are so many different takes on it. I think that it seems like you're almost being skeptical about all the other ones except for the ones that you're adhering to. In most cases, anyways.
No, that I would say that's the case for people of all stripes and affiliations.
Right. Exactly.
For example, we'd be far more distrusting of strangers than our own family members. Now, even if these and not even strangers, people can be more distrustive of friends they've known for quite a bit over their own family members as well. Even though we have relationships with our friends, there's just something about family that might capture us in a certain way. And of course, there are people who probably had families that have let them down, who would very much disagree with me. But it's a bias one can have if you have a strong kind of family connection as well.
Yeah.
And
There's another. Yeah.
by the way, there is a comment from Maple Leaf. John, if you would be so kind, could I please respond?
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Okay, Maple Leaf asks, can you give an example of something horrible you saw in the religious community?
I see that, yes.
Well, if you're referring to the religious community I participate in, there's some things I don't agree with, but I'm not going to share those criticisms out loud over this kind of podcast. It's nothing major or illegal. It's just a personal disagreement I have with the religious community I'm a part of. That it's not something that deserves to draw any attention here. If Maple Leaf, you're adamant about this, and I run into you in the hangout, I'll be sure to just reveal a bit of my distaste.
Sure. I mean, he may actually. I got it up on the screen here. He may actually be referring to my comment. I did actually mention that I'd seen a little bit of horrible stuff within the religious community.
Oh, fair enough.
I wasn't necessarily referring to anything specific, but I can go into a few different things. I have seen some pretty. I don't know if I would call them immoral acts, but I would call them less than nice acts that happened, and a lot of it has to do with drama within the church, some differences within theology, but there were actually some that were people that I would consider really bad people that had infiltrated churches, and I think there are a danger, I think and I kind of had that explained to me as that churches are full of people, and people are naturally bad, and so you can't blame the religion itself for these people that have infiltrated and disguised themselves as Christians. But looking back at it, I would say that I saw actually a lot more horrible things than that. There was actually drama where people were forced out of churches or publicly shamed on pulpits. There was a lot of shame, just general guilting of people all around, and there's even a specific example I know of a date rape case that sort of went through our church and caused a lot of division amongst people, right? And I think that I'm not necessarily saying that religion may be the cause of that, or that's a common experience with anybody, but that's sort of an example of maybe something horrible that I've seen within a religious community that I was told is not a reflection on the religion itself. So I hope that answers you, Maple Leaf. I hope I wasn't coming across as me being accusatory or being harsh in a biased sort of way. I am technically an anti-theist, but it's a very cordial anti-theism where I don't have anything against the Christians who subscribe to it or anything like that.
Yeah, I would point out that that's a bit like loving the sinner and hating the sin, but anyway, that's a separate argument, I think.
By the way, just to enlighten you guys on that particular phrase, the actual phrase is for love of mankind, hatred of sin, and that was spoken by St. Augustine of Hippo. There's a bit of rumor flying around in some evangelical communities that was said by Gandhi and applied by Christians, but That's not the case. That's a quote from the great church father. I would say great church father Saint Augustine of Hippo.
Yeah, I was just referring to the modern version. But yeah, no, that's I'm not. I don't think that that's something that's really possible. But anyway, that again is a separate argument. So um, let's see, where were we?
Yeah, I mean, just
I'm
into
way
the
too.
into the negativity of religion, right? You mentioned Jibran that Philo mentions that that philosophers who cultivate reason, well, I'll just read it out here. Who cultivate reason and reflection stand less in need of such motives to keep them under the restraints of morals, and that the vulgar, who alone may need them, are utterly incapable of so pure a religion as represents the deity to be pleased with nothing but but virtue in human behavior. I think that's a great line.
Can you repeat? I didn't catch the whole thing. Can you repeat it, John?
Sure, absolutely. It's so good. I'll say it twice. We must further consider that philosophers who cultivate reason and reflection stand less in need of such motives to keep them under the restraint of morals, and that the vulgar, who alone may need them, are utterly incapable of so pure a religion as represents the deity to be pleased with nothing but virtue in human behavior. And I think that's really important because they sort of both agree on that. That to be very virtuous and to be pious in that sort of sense, it almost requires a rigor that that the people who the majority of people following religion don't seem to be interested in, right? That acceptance of dogma seems to be antithetical to the purest form of religion that Philo is talking about here.
The kind of religion that he praises is not the kind that can, practically speaking, be shared to the majority of people.
I myself would kind of be inclined to disagree with that sentiment. It seems to me in that statement there's a bit of a distinction drawn between when morality applies and for whom. There's a specific a set of people who do not need moral laws or who don't need to think about moral laws in that sort of way, but at the same time they're better than people who need to think of morality. And I find when somebody says that they're too good, or
I don't think
when it
that's what
comes
he's
across to
saying.
me saying you're too good to hold to something that the lesser man holds on to, then in a sense you are claiming a very, very, very high place for yourself.
Yeah,
And
I
that's
I don't think that's what he's saying at all, though. I think he's saying that the sorts of people who are rigorous enough and who are going to dedicate their lives to studying this true religion are the sorts of people that care enough about morality on their own. It's not that they don't have to do the work. It's merely that they already are moral. It's not to say that they don't necessarily. It's not that they don't need. Well, I don't think anyone needs moral laws because I believe in virtue ethics. But it's not so much that they don't need that morality, it's that they're already inclined to it, and so it doesn't serve as a guide to them, or as at least something that's necessary to them in the same way that it might be necessary to someone else. Someone that has no inclination to tell lies, for example, doesn't have to be told not to lie.
Yeah, and I think he's not necessarily talking about a general ability or the I don't think he's meaning it in a condescending sort of way. I think they're both agreeing on what the perfect religion would be, and then trying to get to it, and then agreeing that it seems to be. What does he say? I think he talks about how it's that both theism or true religion and just like philosophy tends to be always confined to very few people. That because of the difficulty in arriving at the conclusions, it seems that there always is necessarily a limited number of people who are going to arrive at the proper conclusion. And I don't think he means that necessarily in a condescending way, but in a way of just kind of stating what the goal may be.
No, actually, I'd kind of take a bit of issue to that. I do think it's pretentious, but I don't think it's incorrect. I don't think that one needs to be afraid of being pretentious when it comes to these sorts of things. I think it is a true pretense to say that there are some people who are generally inclined towards good more than others, regardless of what moral system you have, unless one's going to argue that everyone is equally inclined to everything, and that is a very challenging position to argue. So I don't know. I think it is, in a sense, him declaring one group morally superior, but I just wouldn't shy necessarily away from that.
Definitely. Okay, well, let's try to get into why Philo thinks that. He says even though superstition or enthusiasm should not put itself in direct opposition to morality, the very diverting of attention, the raising up of a new and frivolous species of merit, and the preposterous distribution which makes it the praise which it makes of praise and blame, must have the most pernicious consequences, and weaken extremely men's attachment to the natural motives of justice and humanity. I've got a big star by this paragraph. I think it's a really controversial paragraph. So I don't know. Do you guys have anything to say about that? It's
Can you repeat that? It didn't sound too controversial.
well, just listen to it real carefully. Even though superstition or enthusiasm should not put itself in direct opposition to morality, the very diverting of the attention, the raising up of a new and frivolous species of merit, and the preposterous distribution which it makes of praise and blame, must have the most pernicious consequences, and weaken extremely men's attachment to the natural motives of justice and humanity.
Ah, I see. Okay, fair enough.
So yeah,
Fair enough.
exactly. I mean, he's saying that that the vulgar superstition of religion seems to be the diverting of attention, right? That we're putting the goals. We know that frivolous new species of merit. He's talking about the goal of theology is putting the emphasis on the eternal and the infinite and the infinite consequences of one's actions, and that is what is actually has the pernicious consequences. He says that it weakens men's attachment to the natural inclination that seems to be immediate, like justice and humanity. And I think that's a really great point.
I think it's a better argument against Buddhism than it is against Christianity, but and I would. This is basically my problem with Buddhism, but anyway.
I think we'd have the same problem with Buddhism then. But
I don't know. I think in a lot of ways Buddhism's got a lot of things right, but I think that's that it also speaks to the goals, right? I mean, when we're like I think when I first read this, I was kind of impressed with how easily it seems to dismiss religion. You can just kind of get rid of it after that. You say that no, you're diverting attention from what's important by following this theology, right? But I think that the more I thought about it, the more it seems like you can't be so dismissive of what people believe to be important, right? It says he's raising up a new and frivolous species of merit, but that species of merit is a personal subjective judgment call, and so I don't know if you can just say that you're raising up a new species of merit. It may be new to the individual, but I think that they're going to value the goals based on their experience, and I think that that's what. So I don't think it's necessarily a great criticism of it, but I think he's very right to point out that it will weaken the motives of justice and humanity. I think that our experiences and our theology can have effects on what we believe to be a just action, and I think that's a good point.
Sorry, my cat's trying to murder me, so I apologize.
No problem.
I might be a little bit distracted for a minute. I do apologize for that.
All right, I got $10 on the cat. How's it going, Eddie?
Not too bad. I'm wondering
Cool.
whether or not to take that wager.
Yeah, well, I mean, what do you think, man? Do you think that?
I'm leaning towards the cat.
He's actually chilled out.
But
You might
anyway,
see the cat grab my head in a moment. Sorry about that.
Oh, what do I personally think of Hume's sentiment? Well,
Right.
Not well, I shouldn't call it Hume's. I would say this is Philo we're speaking of, or
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Well, I myself would personally think that one should analyze this on a case by case. One should analyze this on a case by case basis, as opposed to making it a blanket statement. For example, let's just go with this notion: you're trapped in a burning car, and somebody pulls you out of there. Now, you don't know about this person's mental state. You don't know what caused him to do this. In fact, you're just going to remain agnostic about that. You just know that there's another human being who saved your life. Now, would it really make it? Now, to me, I don't think it would really make a difference if the person just followed what he thought was the noble idea, or of saving another human being, or was doing it because he had a concept of an afterlife to be one, and it does the person the person saw that what needed to be done was done. Now, I'm not, and I would say for me, it wouldn't really matter what caused it, because in the end, good wa- in the end, a form of good was tried. A form of good was acted upon, even if the person is a moral nihilist, someone who just, or a moral non-cognitivist, someone who doesn't believe that um, the notion of morality is even a cognitive idea. Even if that person were to save me, just because he felt like and he got his own personal pleasure out of it, I would still say that the no that the will of the good, or that the will of the good was done at the end, because there's something about it that just speaks to everybody, and I think we should look to. And I think no matter how it speaks to each of the individuals, the fact that it pushes them to act, I think that's what really matters. And when we
Um,
and when we
yeah,
say
yeah,
and even
sure.
when we
I, I, oh, okay, go on, sorry.
and I would also add that the mere emphasis on eternity is just to the mere emphasis on eternity is actually so we may cherish this life. For example, if for example the notion of just living on. Uh, shoot.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I don't necessarily disagree with you. I would push back. Yeah.
Sorry, I was just interrupted there by
No
a family
problem. I
member.
just didn't want any dead air in case you were gone for a while there.
Okay,
Please
fair
continue.
point. The point, the point I was trying to make. The notion of an afterlife is just to emphasize humanity's infinite potential. The notion that we can go on forever, that we are not in a way restricted, and I think that pushes humans to transcend past their boundaries, or at least gives them an imagining of transcendence. Now, whether or
Yeah.
not that transcendence is true, I think at least it pushes us to act greater than we might deem ourselves to be.
Really? Because I think I put much more effort into things because I think that I only have one life and that it'll be wasted if I waste it. And that there's no afterlife, there's no second chance from my view, and so it makes it all the more important that I act in a valuable, moral way. I I think that would cheapen it.
Well,
When I believed in the afterlife many years ago, I certainly didn't put anywhere near as much importance on my current life. I thought, well, whatever, I'll live on. I'll continue to exist in some form or another. This isn't my only chance to do these things. But now that I believe that every chance is my only chance to some extent, it really changes how I behave. And I think
well,
for the better.
Hmm.
For myself, I think any behavior I might have had to change is at the pleasure of being able to do God's work for all of eternity. The notion that I have, the notion that every good act I do is is ultimately in service of something greater than me. And even though it is excruciating, the fact is that excruciation is to the saint supposed to bring a form of greater pleasure. For example, I know of saints who died as martyrs with smiles on their faces, just doing the work of God. I know I've seen monks that walk around in
Yeah.
courtyards who have literally nothing. They offer a vow of celibacy and poverty. They
Actually, I
literally
think
have nothing, and yet just doing that holy work puts a smile on their face. Just having that kind of obedience, and that
I think
kind of and that kind of and ignoring what we might think is necessary in order for us to live a comfortable life or a more fulfilling life. It I think it does help put us into perspective, because for me, whether or not my life ends in 5 years from now or an eternity from now, I think the fact is I want to push everything with a bit of joy in my face, because if everything to me is gone, then
all right. Well, okay,
then
fair
then,
enough.
to,
But
then what
yeah,
then I would agree with what the actual Epicurus said, there is nothing, there is no pleasure or pain to worry about in death because it just is. There is literally nothing remaining left over to care. Now, if I really wouldn't see any purpose of, well, I wouldn't say any purpose of. I think you can help other human beings and live that kind of a moral life. But maybe I should rephrase that to saying, if somebody is to die, if somebody is to die in 10 minutes or in 10 years from now, no matter what kind of intention it has, it's not going to. It's just not going to delay the outcome, which is equivalent for all people.
Sure.
I think it ultimately comes back to the point that it is our nature that matters far more than our beliefs, because, I mean, I think that ultimately, presumably, I mean, our beliefs certainly do matter to some extent as far as our happiness and how we act morally or immorally, but I think our natural disposition is fundamentally more important. You are naturally disposed, presumably, to try to make the best of things, Epicurus, and so someone else, many other people could easily say, well, I have an eternity, so why spend any particular part of it in any particular state? But you take the attitude that I think is quite good, that you should try to enjoy every bit of it. But that has more to do with your disposition, doesn't it, than just your beliefs, because there are certainly religious people that take completely contradictory views. And similarly, there are...
And that's fair. And I would also say that fair enough.
And there are existential nihilists who take completely different views than I do. I mean, I'm an existential nihilist, but I think that doing great works is really important because it's all we can do. So I think it has more to do with the natural disposition.
Yeah, and of course you always get those whiny emo kids who are saying, there's nothing about life, man. It's all meaningless and darkness. And where are my razor blades, Mom?
Yeah, they don't realize it's self-contradictory, because if it's meaningless and darkness, then, well, whatever. Point is, and you
have a mom who will give you razor blades, which is... But anyways, I guess
supportive to the extreme.
Yeah, I mean, but I'd like to get back to that, Eddie. I mean, you're talking about, the idea of eternal consequences being a positive aspect to your belief, right?
About eternal duration of. I'm talking about eternal duration of obedience being the motivator,
right?
Because obedience to God is ultimately what.
Right, and I think I see.
Ultimately filled, and I want to keep on doing that.
Yeah, I think I see what you're saying about the eternity of it is not necessarily, the duration of it's not necessarily the issue. For you it would be it's the fact that you are resting easy in the knowledge that that you are going to be fine in that duration, right? And I think it's weird. I think Philo would kind of argue against you here, right? I mean, he says that the steady attention alone to so important an interest as that of eternal salvation is apt to extinguish the benevolent affections and beget a narrow, contracted selfishness. And when such a temper is encouraged, it easily eludes all the general precepts of charity and benevolence. And I think that there is a danger in that, right? In the idea that, I think, what does he say here? Where the interests of religion are concerned, no morality can be forcible enough to bind the enthusiastic zealot. The sacredness of the cause sanctifies every measure which can be made use of to promote it. And I think that's sort of the danger, right? That there's an ends that justify the means, right? That you start to be able to look at eternal salvation as the only goal, and that any means by which you could attain that goal will then be sanctified, right? You're not judging the value of that act for the consequences, but only for the eternal consequences or the ultimate consequences.
Well, first of all, yeah, but that's always to eschew the earthly consequences, or to basically put past the earthly consequences. For example, the consequence of the end justifying the mean isn't me sending my enemy to the crucifix. It's allowing the enemy to send myself to the crucifix. As Saint Jacob the Syrian once said, it is better to be the crucified than the crucifier. And as Christ himself says, this wise man over here with the to pointing fingers.
Yeah.
For those of you who will, pick up your cross and follow me. And I think to myself, that is the ultimate consequence as I see it. It's to me that to me being Christ-like is the essence of being a Christian. To be somebody who cares, has compassion, who is apt to warn people, who is apt to give charity unto all, who is apt to die for others, and to me, being a Christian is to see something in Christ and want to emulate that in oneself.
Hmm.
And that's where I would disagree with Philo in my own right, because the purpose of religion, as I see it, even in terms of an afterlife, is through preparing to go through the worst thing of all, if it so needed, a cross. It's not something someone chooses with a faint of heart or should want to. So that's how I would kind of reply to that.
Yeah, I mean, what do you mean by that? Like, that it's. What do you mean about the attitude that you were mentioning there?
It's an attitude where you put your, well, as a friend of mine once said, sacrifices don't mean anything. A friend of mine once asked me, what does a sacrifice mean? Because if you can sacrifice something, that means you can stand to live without it, and you can stand to give it up. Whereas the virtue in a sacrifice, and to which I said, the virtue in the sacrifice isn't in what you give up, it's what you affirm in giving something up. So, for example, when you put Christ before all others, that means you put your own self-worth, body, mind. So you put that, you're willing to give that all just to be in that image and to have Christ lead you, and that's the attitude that strives, not an attitude that attacks or hurts your fellow man, but rather one that encourages you to be a martyr, to be a monastic, to give up everything. And that's really the position, Paul, and that's the attitude I try to take. I don't put anyone else on a crucifix. I make sure that if anyone has to walk under a crucifix, it's me, because again, it is following in the Christly attitude that is poignant, not necessarily following in an attitude that wants to guarantee you an afterlife, because in Christianity, to be in the presence of Christ himself for all of eternity is itself the eternal reward. And of course, to do that, you must come onto him in the image you want to make for yourself. So that's the attitude I'm trying to push forward. It's one where I take pride in that duration. It's not one that blinds me to the things of this world. It's one that makes me realize that the things of this world are not will pale in comparison to the world to come, in the sense that they are worth you giving them up, not forcing anyone else to give up what God hasn't requested of them to give up, or what God doesn't or what they refuse to desire to give up, because that's their own decision.
Well, I don't think Hume would have any problem with that. I think, I mean, I mean, he might have some criticisms, but your overall view, I think he'd agree with, because I have no idea what Hume would actually criticize or not, but it seems that he would agree with you, because you seem to be trying to practice the true religion he's talking about, the one that's thoughtful and careful. But I think his point, I don't think he's really saying that religion always corrupts. He's saying that it has the potential to corrupt, and that the people that it helps are good people already, and maybe they do more because of Christianity or because of Buddhism or what have you. But they also could have been better for other reasons as well. And so, in that sense, the good that it brings is to people who already are good, and it's not necessarily a unique way of bringing it to them. I think that's the argument. I think that certainly you've taken it in a very good direction. So I wouldn't criticize that at all. I think the point, though, isn't really addressed to people that are as theologically sophisticated as you, but really are addressed to those that are more interested in dogma. and just have never thought about these things. That's really who he's addressing. And so I don't know if he'd necessarily take too much. He'd have too much of a problem with what you said. I don't
Yeah,
personally.
I think I am. He may have a few things. I noticed that Epicurus, you're sort of in line with Cleanthes here, where he says when he's trying to warn Philo not to push his skepticism too far, and I think he's kind of sort of warning him against blasphemy, and he says. Forfeit not this principle, the only great comfort in life, in our principal support in all of attacks of adverse fortune. The most agreeable reflection which it is possible for human imagination to suggest is that of genuine theism, which represents us as the workmanship of a being perfectly good, wise, and powerful, who created us for happiness, who, having implanted in us the immeasurable desires for good, will prolong our existence to all eternity, and will transfer to us an infinite variety of scenes in order to satisfy those desires and render our felicity complete and durable. And I think you're very much in line with that. That you're looking at it like I have this desire for good and this desire to be for pleasure, right? Or at least for this desire for whatever it is that would satisfy you. And I think that it's very natural to assume that if there is a creator up there, why wouldn't he have a plan with which that desire will be satisfied, right? Why would he give you a desire that seems almost infinite, as far as we can tell, and then not satisfy that desire for us in the long run, right?
But he's saying he does, though, right? I mean, that's the point, is that he does satisfy that infinite desire in the infinite afterlife.
Yeah, I mean, Cleanthes does suggest that. I think there's but I think Philo kind of goes in rightly. He says, these are sort of if you take these appearances on face value, it does seem like, of course, the deity would want to render us happy in the durable sense, right? In an eternal sort of sense, right? And he would do what was best or most efficient to make that happen. But I think that Philo would say that I think these appearances are deceitful, and that that really life is more about terrors and about sorrow. That religion is more related to sorrow rather than to joy. And I think that kind of moves us into the next part here, where he's sort of talking about the idea that that religion seems to be more closely related with sorrow and melancholy, and the idea of focusing on the incomprehensibility of what lies beyond death, and the gloom that sort of comes along with that, and that seems to be the most obvious, or at least the most common part of religion, right? And that I think he even says that when a man is in a cheerful disposition, he rarely ever thinks of religion. And I think that's a really important point also. That
Yeah.
I think he is hitting on something there, that that it is sort of the desperation that seems to be where religion really seems to seek to fill a void or to fill a purpose. And I don't know you can necessarily correlate it that people are religious because of the sorrow, or to help them to get rid of the sorrow. I think Cleanthes is suggesting that religion is our method of getting away from that. But I think it is important to note that sort of correlation, right? That people tend to be more religious when things are going bad rather than when things are going really well.
I think that applies to the what he would consider the popular religion, but again, I think that isn't a disagreement with what Epicurus has said.
I would also like to add some things as well. The difference between the Christian, the Judeo-Christian, and the Greek understanding of what reality is the kind of like this. For the Greek, there is in the beginning chaos, and after chaos, everything is formed through the eternal chaos, and we have a world wherein a life can form, and in the midst of all this, we ask ourselves, well, is this really all there is? And of course, you have, not all of them were hedonists, but you have kind of this attitude where what can be considered as an affirmation that this is basically what we have and we should live with it. Whereas in the Judeo-Christian understanding, and the Judeo-Christian Islamic understanding, the notion is that we have a world that is at one point created perfect. At a second point, there is the chaos. There is where the evil, a pervasion of evil comes in, and at the end, that's where the good will be restored. And basically, the Christian is far more far more optimistic. He understands why there is sorrow, because at this present time there is chaos, but he looks forward to a time when there is a pleasure. Whereas for the Greeks, they have to be in a way a pessimist. They have to recognize that, yeah, between this is good now, but between then and there is a bit of chaos, and we have to understand that this pessimism we have is just going to help us guide through and being in terms of understanding what we ought and should affirm. So in terms of that, when you ask why does religion appeal to those who are broken, I would say it doesn't really appeal to those who are broken. It's more along the lines of appeals to people who think that there ought to be more. And this is why even rich people, comfortable people, turn to forms of religion. Not even Christianity, but there are people who grow up with very rich backgrounds who become Buddhist monks and who do give up quite a bit in terms of searching for that nirvana. There are
Well, the Buddha himself was very rich, actually.
He's a prince,
exactly.
yeah.
And just to go even further, I've known women who come from very well-established Lebanese families who actually go and become nuns, who do give something up, even though they are in a very comfortable position. Now, while it's true, it's easier for a broken person to see, hey, there's something in this world that isn't right. This isn't to say that someone rich can't say, vanity, vanity, all the world is vanity. And I would really disagree.
I think you may be mixing up between broken and broke there, right? I think that people can be happy in poor situations, and rich people can be sad. Right, exactly. But yeah, I definitely take your point there.
Well, one just a small note. Chaos doesn't mean bad, it means disorder, though. So there's not really a negative connotation there. That's more of like a modern idea. But I just wanted to just make that note there.
Yeah, I guess the point I was just trying to make is that the world in which we have to live in comes from disorder. So we shouldn't be too surprised if there is disorder in the world. Basically, it's
but I don't know if that's a cynical view, though. I mean, again, I'm an existential nihilist, and I think that the world came from disorder, but I don't think it has a purpose. But I think that that's precisely why we should create a subjective purpose. That lack of a purpose is a much greater driver to me than the fact that there is a greater purpose.
But as a determinist, how do you create purpose? Technically, your natural mechanisms are pushing.
I'm sorry, no, that's misunderstanding of determinism. Okay, a nuclear reactor creates energy, but it does so deterministically. So to create does not mean to choose in the sense does not mean to choose in the sense of libertarian free will. I don't have a choice. Sorry, please do let me finish though.
All right,
I don't have a choice in that sense. I will choose one thing, but I do have a will in the same sense that a force has a will. It does something, and so by encouraging people to choose one thing, I'm doing so because those forces, those physical forces that have caused me to choose this thing, are then causing me to encourage them to choose it. So I don't have a choice in that sense. But I do have a will in the same way that electromagnetism has a will. It does something. So to create and determinism are not mutually exclusive. There are some deterministic cosmologies that would not have any sort of creation in them, but those are like static universe cosmologies, and I absolutely don't ascribe to that.
All right, but just to draw something a little there, would you call the will of a magnetic field to be a subjective fact?
No. Here's the point, though. I think that that it's not that it's objective, it's that it's an objective fact, and my will is just as objective.
Mhm.
And it is really the combination of the wills of those things. And again, here I'm using will very loosely. What I mean by that is it is an action, a tendency towards something. I just tend to do things. It's not that I can choose between two tendencies consciously, or I can believe that I'm choosing it. Unfortunately, when we're talking about determinism, it's really easy to get like this is why I'm not, I don't really want to talk about this right now, is because it's really easy to get stuck in our intuitions about will, when they really lead us astray. So that's why I don't really want to go too deep into this.
Okay,
I would require far more in-depth discussion.
Fair enough.
But it's hard to even discuss it in terms that make sense to people based on just their general intuitions about these things. It's hard to understand it in those terms.
All right, cool.
Yeah, I think I think right towards the end here, Philo starts bringing up the idea. He kind of brings it up in the same sense here. I don't know if I'm switching topics on you guys or not.
It's fine.
That that these models of religion that we tend to emphasize, the death and the gloom, and the melancholy and the sorrow, that they tend to be products of philosophy themselves. And that, what does he say? For as death lies between the eye and the prospect of futurity, that event is so shocking to nature that it must throw a gloom on all regions which lie beyond it, and suggest to the generality of mankind the idea of Cerberus and Furies, devils and torrents, and fire and brimstone. So I think it's really clear that that a lot of what motivates theology seems to be the unknown of death, of what lies beyond our, and what lies even just in our future itself. And I think sometimes we, like you were saying, maybe Eddie, that that there's almost a, theology can provide you with this idea of certainty, or at least confidence in that there is a plan, right? I think I heard Bill Maher once say, it's when I was a theist, it wasn't that God was my friend, he was my agent, right? Like he didn't have to know, like he didn't have to care about me, love me, or do anything like that. He had to be working on my behalf. He had to have the plan, and then I could just follow it, right? And that would be enough, right? And that's all I really needed. And I don't necessarily think that was my attitude back then, but I think that could be a common attitude, right? That God is the answer. It's a way of being confident in the future. All things work together for good to those who love the Lord, right? I mean, that sort of assurance can be very, very comforting, anyways.
Yeah,
Especially
true.
when we're talking about
True.
uncertainty and
True, but I guess you could also say the same thing about scientific notions of aerodynamics. I mean, in terms of or maybe perhaps in terms of dentistry. For example, if you've ever been to a dentist and everything can look very scary to you, it's only when the dentist reassures you that everything has a purpose or a goal in mind, and basically you're kind of wary of the answer, but you go along with it, and you adjust yourself, and basically you're used to that notion of just going to the dentist. Now, I'm not sure whether
sure,
or not
let me try to.
Is going to this. Now, I'm not sure if this theological dentist is going to pan out or not, but in terms of but while it does provide me security, I don't think that is germane to whether or not we can call this thing as being true or false. In the same way that
are you trying to get to the idea of the confidence being sort of in the deference to the deity, or the deference to a further authority, by allowing the authority to be the one in control, or to acknowledge that the things that you maybe don't have control over could be controlled by something else. Is that where the confidence lies, or do you think it's more about the ultimate goal, right? That that no matter what, the consequences are going to work out for you. Do you view it as like an active role that the deity would be playing in it, or more of just a setup, right? That he put these actions into place. He started the whole thing, and then you're kind of becoming the
Started,
what he
certainly. I
determines.
mean, if God was having to make changes on your behalf, then God made a mistake earlier on, presumably, or didn't know the future. So I would say they set it up from the beginning. I'm not a theist, though, so that's what I would say about God if I was a theist.
Right, right.
But that would be my argument.
As for my argument, I think any kind of any any kind of argument, I would say, of a philosophical nature is a bit of a leap in the dark, because we all have to make these kinds of decisions every day, whether or not it pertains to God. For example, every day we all have to affirm to ourselves that, you know what, there is such a thing as objective morality, or there is such a thing as free will. I know Jibran doesn't hold to that notion, but for many that's a very comforting notion to have, that there is such a thing as that aesthetic properties are actually real, and they do verify that what we hold to be beautiful are beautiful whether or not we think of them, so on and so forth. So there are these leaps that people do take for good reason. Now, whether or not these ever pan out will not change the fact of how we try to approach them in all honesty. So I think as long as I myself approach any subject in honesty, whether it's theology or Ptolemaic physics or hollow earth theory, if I do try to approach that thing honestly, even if I spend my whole life working on that and I'm wrong, I think there is going to be a bit of knowledge that contributes overall.
Well, that's a good way of looking at it, man.
I would say, though, I mean, if you're going to dismiss philosophical argumentation on the question of God, then how could you possibly hold to divine simplicity?
What do you mean?
If you're just saying philosophical argument when it comes to God, not really relevant, then how could we possibly argue from the basis of divine simplicity?
Oh, no, it's
for
wholly
anything?
relevant. My philosophical arguments are wholly relevant to God.
But wait, hold on. Then what did you just say? I really am literally falling asleep, so I wouldn't be surprised if I missed it.
It pertains to the exploration of these philosophical arguments in truth, not necessarily the truth value as being the ultimate justifier of needing to explore them. I would feel a lot more comfortable if people explored all sorts of notions, whether or not they tend to be true, and hold on to them as being false, than people just throwing them across the waste bin and just wondering centuries later, was that really the right decision? I think we should work on everything, even if we do not consider it, even if it doesn't ultimately pan out to being right.
Well, sure. I mean, that's why I have these discussions. So I agree with you on that strongly. But I'm not quite sure what you mean, though, then, when you say that the philosophical argument isn't that relevant, or did I mishear you? What did you say at the beginning of that? Because I thought you said...
To me, the exploration of the philosophical argument is more important than the truth value of that philosophical argument, but it is because that the truth values of the arguments that we do hold to be true are going to take place, that even the explorations of bad ideas will be important, because if you can have the best people defending a bad idea and that bad idea is still going down, well, that just shows
Sure.
how incredible the human mind is, and how bad the idea was.
I would agree that it is more important to be precise than it is to be accurate. That it's more important to be rigorous in your formulation of your ideas than accurate. I can make a lot of true statements that are extraordinarily unhelpful. But anyway, Eddie, it looks like Eddie needs to run off.
It's very pertinent that I do. If I can just leave now, can I have you guys wrap up the show for me?
Absolutely, Eddie. We'll let him know that you've converted to atheism. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, you are a mystic. He does say that if you follow divine simplicity, you're practically an atheist. So I guess you're technically on our team,
you guys
according to him.
are worse than Dale Tuggy. All right.
Cool. Absolutely. Cool. Well, that was a quick leave by Eddie there. So how you doing, Jibran? There was only a
Doing
couple
well.
other ones I was curious to get to.
All right, sure, we can go over them quickly.
Sure. Yeah. Just here. I'll give you some quotes, and you can just kind of go at it here. And I'll just give me your first impression of it. It is an absurdity to believe that the deity has human passions, and one of the lowest human passions, a
Yeah.
restless appetite for applause. And it's also an inconsistency to believe that that this deity has this human passion but has not others, and in particularly a disregard for the opinions of creatures so much inferior. That's one of my favorite paragraphs in there. It clearly shows all the problems with analogy, and I'm kind of disappointed Eddie kind of stuck out at that point. Yeah, I think you'd probably have something to say about that, but I
Um,
think
yeah, I don't know
it's
if we
very
can call it
telling.
an analogy anymore, but yeah,
Yeah.
no, yeah, this is, yeah, I suppose the problem with analogy, and well, I think it gets, no, absolutely, I think it's a problem with the analogy of the mind in particular, with God, um, but but yeah, let's see. I agree with him that it is it's at least not something that we should claim without some strong justification. The one might be able to argue this point, but it would require more than it's usually more attention ought to be given to this than usually is. But I don't think it is. This is again. I don't think this is a demonstration that those ideas about God are incorrect. Just that they are not as well formulated or defended as they could be.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. I think a lot of what Philo is doing here is not necessarily putting up a premise or a position for himself, but he's basically throwing questions, or I think as being as a skeptic, he's just being skeptical about all these claims, right? I don't know if he's putting forward a positive position by the end of it. I think the only thing he actually ends up suggesting is that Pamphilus be that what does he say, that the philosophical skeptic is the first and most essential step towards being a sound
yeah,
believing Christian. And I think that's a very interesting way of putting it, like that the skepticism that he's throwing on all these dogmas that seem so well founded are really the first step to being a better Christian, and
hmm
I think that's a really important step. And I think I really wanted to get Eddie's opinion on that also,
yeah,
because I think that Eddie is I think he's a great example of it, right? That he is
sure.
willing to delve into it and answer these questions. And I think he's willing to put on that philosophical this philosophical
Absolutely.
skepticism
Yeah.
that Philo is really putting forward here. And I think the only thing left to say would be maybe that Philo's right. Um, no, I don't know. I mean, who would you say kind of comes out in a positive light at the end of this, right? At first, I kind of thought Cleanthes sort of he's got some great points in here, but and I know that Pamphilus does refer to him as being the more convincing of them. But I think Philo does come across with he does score the most points as far as raising doubts, right? I
Yeah.
think that's really, if that was the goal, I think that Philo does come out on top.
Um, I guess I'm not. I haven't really thought about this particular question because I don't really think it matters who comes out on top. It's more interesting just what thoughts are brought forward in the minds of the readers. So I didn't really think about that. I was mostly just I don't know trying to feel like I understand what he was saying. But yeah, probably I think that Philo ends up probably looking good, better than the others in this case. But again, someone it's hard to know where that is. This is something that's frustrating about dialogues. It's hard to know. Say Plato or say someone writes a dialogue, um, and the position that they're advocating for, the person that they're writing well, okay, so sorry, I'm way too tired for this, really. But
Well, I know what
it's
you're
hard
saying,
to
though. I
know
mean,
when someone is merely failing to articulate the opposing point of view better, as well as it could be articulated,
yeah.
or when they actually have the better position. That's something that's challenging to tell in dialogues in particular.
Definitely, and I think this one's especially hard because there's certain positions that they kind of take against each other in a two-on-one style, but that actually switches, right? I think that Philo and Demia both affirm that there is an incomprehensibility to the deity, and Cleanthes sort of goes against that. But in the long run, I believe that Philo is actually probably raising doubts towards the idea of religion itself, and in that way, I think he's going directly against Cleanthes and Demia, who seem to be advocates for dogma, right, or the what tends to be considered true religion at that time, right? And so I think it's interesting that there's sort of this two-on-one dynamic that tends to switch all the way around, and I think it would be tough to say who came out on top because I was kind of affected by so many things that each of the characters said instead of just one.
Well, I think the bigger point is that it doesn't really matter who came out on top. It's not so much about who
Well, I
made
don't know.
better
I think
points.
it matters who won who. I think Philo won Cleanthes and Demia, according to some people's rules, anyways.
No, I don't actually. It's much more interesting the points that are made, and I think in that sense it was a really good dialogue. But I really don't. I'm too tired to keep doing this. I'm sorry.
Definitely, dude. Well, that's cool, man.
This
Let's wrap it up here with a hearty goodbye. Now, I had a bit of I think we have some Sophia ex nihilo news, right, to run through. If you wanted to run through your next event and maybe what you're planning on after that, also.
Please correct me, John, because I'm sure to say something wrong.
Mhm.
So currently, we're going to try to do Theaetetus again next Friday, but unlike previous times, I've actually gotten a bunch of people to agree to show up ahead of time,
Nice.
rather than putting it out there and hoping people end up coming. So in fact, we might have too many people trying to come for next Friday. So
Oh
that's
boy.
the different problem.
Right.
So
Have
we're
to have
gonna do
a bench system or something like that. Be bringing people on from on.
yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, we'll have to come up with something clever. So yeah, that we're finally gonna do that, hopefully, unless something disastrous happens. Next Friday, not in 4 days, but on the 7th of March.
Sure.
Um, and that is a dialogue. It's another Platonic dialogue, and it's about epistemology. There's also I'm too tired to do a full introduction, but it's mostly about epistemology. It's where we got the really basic epistemological idea that knowledge is true justified belief. And now a lot of epistemologists disagree with this, but this is kind of the starting point for epistemology. Like this is the founding document. Oh, sorry, I realized I used a word without defining it. Epistemology is the study of knowledge, and so this is one of the first documents that really tries to articulate an epistemological position. Rigorously. And for that reason, I think it's an incredibly important one. It does happen to be rather long, and it talks a lot about stuff that's not so relevant nowadays. A lot of it is Socrates debunking a rather old and no longer at all subscribed to philosophical idea. And we're not going to talk too much about that. Actually, I think we're gonna talk about it briefly, but try to stick to the things that are still relevant. So it won't be too dense. If you tried to read Theaetetus, the first half of it is mostly Socrates debunking ideas of the day.
Yeah, and I mean, it gets into it a little bit, and it does in fact, narrow down the definition of knowledge after that. But you're right. I mean, he does spend about half the time going into the man is the measure of all things, and it's very very amazing. But yeah, definitely. So that's going to be happening on next Friday, March 7th. That's awesome. Do you know what the time will be on that, or?
It'll either be 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. Central Time, Central Standard Time, Central U.S. Time.
Beautiful.
Probably 6 p.m. And yeah, we're probably that document. It's exceptionally long. It's like 25,000 words or something like that. But if you're gonna you don't have to read it to be able to follow along. It's a fair bit of it is superfluous to the discussion we're going to have. So do not feel obliged to read it beforehand, viewers. But yeah, after that, I'm going to try to. This might be a bit ambitious, and plans may change, but I'm going to try to do Republic afterwards, chapter by chapter. This is a book that it's really just a fantastic book. Before we do Republic, I'm gonna post a video where I'm just gonna talk about the format of that a bit more in depth once we've got that pinned down. For the most part, we haven't done that kind of introduction to series, but this one is going to be long enough that I think it's worth it.
Definitely. Especially when we're going to be grouping it under kind of, if you're doing each chapter, I think there's,
13 episodes.
13 chapters, yeah.
Which is 26 hours of podcast.
That's amazing, right? So, yeah, exactly. It's a big endeavor. I think you're in good stead, though. Republic's a fairly popular work. I know that my first year of university required me to read it, so that'll be a good step, right? My first philosophy class, it was required reading, so that's a great step, right? I think you're going to find a lot of interest is generated, and probably going to be a ton of people checking it out. I would encourage anybody who is interested to contact us. We're not we don't really take on kind of random people into the Hangouts as much. But if we kind of met you and know you and think that you have a pretty good grasp of the issues and that you're fairly good at having a really great, polite, constructive dialogue is what I'm looking for. Yeah, then we're happy to have you on here. We try to limit the panels to a certain amount, but since there's going to be so many episodes, I'm sure getting you on one of them will not be an issue at this point. So that'll
be very helpful. Yeah, please contact us, and we can talk to you and as a sort of audition. And as for following along on that particular work, if you're interested in reading it, I'd strongly recommend the Alan Bloom translation. It's a literal translation, so it's a little bit harder to read than like the Oxford University Press one, but so the thing that irritated me about the Oxford University Press version is that every time you see the word God, it's singular and capitalized, but Plato was a polytheist, and so in Alan Bloom's translation you get by Zeus instead of by God. Or by the gods instead of by God. And there are a lot of other differences. That's the most obvious one. There are textual differences. It's a bit harder to follow along at times, but it makes more sense, and there are genuinely different messages in there. So I'd strongly encourage you to pick up that version if you're going to. But given how much depth we're going to go into, it probably won't even be necessary, to be honest, to read it. It's a great book. I'd strongly recommend it. But again, don't feel that you have to read these things ahead of time to listen to these discussions. So the details of that are going to get worked out in the next few weeks. But if all things go according to plan, the Friday after next should be the first episode of Sophia ex nihilo Republic.
Ah, exciting. Oh, look at that! Eddie's excited. Hey, Eddie, welcome back, buddy. You missed some great points. I was just you missed all my best philosophical points. So that's too bad.
Let's not go over them again, just because.
Don't worry, John. You have much more. Don't worry, John. If I know someone like you, you have much more in store.
Oh, thanks, buddy. That's really nice of you to say. So yeah, we were just kind of wrapping up. We were just kind of going into the news. As far as my next hosted podcast, I'm not 100% certain where I'm going to be going with that. I kind of like to bounce between philosophical works and apologetic works, just to keep things kind of interesting and draw in a few more. So, I mean, Eddie, did you have any suggestions as far as that goes? Anything that's like your favorite, or
you mean anything in terms of apologetics?
I
totally. Best that we go with C.S. Lewis.
Oh, Mere Christianity? Were you thinking?
Not necessarily Mere Christianity, because that one's been done. I was thinking something along the lines of.
Does he have any shorter works that we could?
Basically, I have in my hand the C.S. Lewis complete collection. It was a Christmas present for me, and what I'm thinking we do is actually go over the problem of pain, in which C.S. Lewis seeks to grapple with the problem of evil, suffering, sorrow, and how to reconcile that with God.
Well, that sounds like a great option, as long as we can find PDFs of it online.
It's only 100 pages, so.
Sure. I'll do some
Cool.
research into it and take a look at it.
Yeah.
That's not terrible. We'll be in discussion. If anybody else has any other suggestions, that'd be awesome. But for now, that's what I'm looking for. Just something different, off the wall, sort of maybe philosophically based, but more of an apologetic literature would
Yeah.
be fun to tackle.
And presumably that'll be next Monday, unless we can't decide on anything in between then and now.
Exactly. I think it's good to have an open sort of policy where we're not too pinned down with what we're doing or what we have to do. But I would love to do it next Monday, and that sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
I'd also be down for anything by G.K. Chesterton.
Ooh.
All right. Well,
Yeah,
thank
G.K.
you all for
Chesterton
watching.
is a Catholic apologist who lived in the early 20th century.
Oh, okay.
Well, all right.
Cool.
I think
I'll look them up, definitely.
we'll
Well, yeah. With
probably,
that, I think we
wrap
can
up.
definitely say goodbye. Thanks a lot, guys, for your help and for your input. I did actually learn quite a bit today, so I'm excited about that. I think this dialogue has a lot, probably more we could have said about it.
Yeah.
I would encourage anybody to read it and fill in discussions. I found it's almost been invaluable in my current discussions with theists. So I mean, I would encourage anybody to read it for sure.
And
Feel free to send us
and,
angry emails if we missed anything as well.
And,
Oh, please do.
and for all you theists and hopefully aspiring apologists out there, please read David Hume because he will actually represent a lot of the skepticism you will face on a daily basis. If you can take on a skeptic like Hume, you should have no problem with your regular Joe Schmo.
Yeah, or John F. McDropout.
Or you'd have a bit of a tougher time with your John F. McDropout.
That's true. He's a shark, that one.
He is pretty sharp.
Cool, guys. All right. Well, we'll talk to you later. Say goodbye, and we'll hang out and we'll chat
Good
about this. Thanks, guys. Night.
I think that's